The morning of the invasion arrived quietly, without any warning. At first, the people of Earth went about their daily lives, unaware of the massive threat lurking in the vastness of space. It was supposed to be just another ordinary day. But as the sun rose over cities and towns, the sky began to change. Across the world, strange, flickering lights appeared in the sky, too bright to be stars, and too swift to be airplanes. People stopped in their tracks, looking up, confused, and wondering what was happening. Some thought it was a comet, others thought it was a new government project, but the truth was far more terrifying than anything they could imagine. The first signal of the invasion came not from the ground, but from the sky. A massive fleet of ships, each as large as a mountain, emerged from the darkness of space and into Earth's orbit. The ships, sleek and metallic, gleamed under the light of the sun, their strange, almost lifeless designs sending shivers down the spines of anyone who saw them. The world's leaders scrambled to make sense of what was happening. Military forces were mobilized, but nothing could prepare them for the overwhelming force that was about to descend upon them. Within minutes, the ships began to descend, their engines roaring like thunder as they broke through Earth's atmosphere. The sheer scale of their size was beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. From below, it looked as if the sky itself was being torn apart. Panic spread across the globe like wildfire. Cities were plunged into chaos. People screamed and ran in every direction, unsure of where to go or what to do. It was a nightmare, and it had only just begun. The invaders were swift. Their ships unleashed powerful beams of energy that cut through the Earth's defenses like a hot knife through butter. Military bases, communication centers, and power grids were obliterated in moments. Nations scrambled to respond, but the invaders were always one step ahead, their advanced technology making Earth's weapons seem like nothing more than toys. It wasn't long before Earth's defense systems were completely neutralized. And just as quickly, the ground forces of the invaders began to land. The Valtteri Dominion, as the invaders called themselves, showed no mercy. People could only watch in horror as the first wave of invaders touched down. Tall, armored beings with glowing eyes emerged from their ships. They moved swiftly, almost effortlessly, their boots leaving indents in the ground as they advanced. Their weapons were unlike anything Earth had ever seen, emitting pulses of energy that disintegrated anything in their path. Buildings crumbled, roads cracked, and the air was filled with the sound of destruction. The invaders didn't speak, their intentions clear as they crushed anything that dared to stand in their way. Earth's armies, though brave, were overwhelmed and outclassed. As the days passed, the Valtteri continued their assault. Major cities fell one by one. The invaders did not take prisoners, but instead enslaved the survivors, forcing them into submission. Earth's people, once free and proud, were now prisoners on their own planet. But it wasn't just the military that was targeted. The Valtteri Dominion sought to break the spirit of every man, woman, and child, making them see that resistance was futile. But the Dominion had made one massive mistake. They had underestimated the human spirit. In the midst of the chaos, a small group of survivors began to gather. They were not soldiers, but ordinary people who refused to bow to the invaders. A former teacher, a mechanic, a doctor, and a few others came together, all united by one belief: humanity would not fall without a fight. They watched as their cities burned, as their homes were reduced to ashes, but they also saw something else. The Valtteri, despite their advanced technology, were not invincible. They had made Earth their battlefield, but they had not anticipated what humans could do when backed into a corner. The human resistance grew in secret, though they were few and scattered. Every day they watched, learned, and waited. They knew that the Valtteri would not show mercy. They had to be smarter, more determined, and more creative. Earth's military, though beaten, was not entirely wiped out. Hidden beneath the ruins of cities and military bases were secret caches of old weapons and technologies. The resistance began to scavenge these resources, building what they could to fight back. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep hope alive. One night, while the invaders rested, the resistance made their first move. They launched a small, covered strike on a Volteri supply ship. Though the mission was dangerous, the humans pulled it off, capturing valuable technology that would later become the key to their survival. The humans began to understand the Volteri's weaknesses, small but significant details that could turn the tide in their favor. They discovered that the invaders, despite their strength, were not accustomed to guerrilla warfare. They relied too much on their superior firepower and failed to account for the relentless human determination. As the weeks went on, the resistance carried out more attacks, more strikes, each one slightly bolder than the last. Though they still faced overwhelming odds, something changed. The humans were no longer just surviving. They were fighting back. The Volteri began to notice. They had thought Earth's people weak, but now they could see that the humans were far from helpless. A spark of rebellion had been lit, and it was growing. The first whispers of hope spread throughout the survivors. The world might be burning, but the fire in humanity's heart was just beginning to rise. The invaders, however, were not ready to give up their conquest so easily. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would regret it. The stage was set for a battle that would decide the fate of Earth and its people. The fight for survival had begun, and the Volteri Dominion would soon realize that the humans they thought they had enslaved were not so easily defeated. The true strength of Earth's people was about to be revealed. The Volteri had started a war they thought would be over in days, but instead, it would drag on for years. And in the end, it was the humans who would determine the outcome. It had been weeks since the Volteri Dominion first landed on Earth, and the invaders had already laid claim to much of the planet. Cities burned, nations fell, and the world seemed on the brink of total destruction. The people of Earth, once proud and free, were now prisoners under the rule of the Volteri. But in the shadows, something was stirring. Though the Dominion soldiers had wiped out most of Earth's military, there was a spark of resistance that refused to be extinguished. It started small, with whispers and rumors. A few brave souls, ordinary people, had begun to fight back. These were not soldiers, not warriors, but survivors who had lost everything, yet still clung to the hope that they could one day reclaim their world. Captain Marcus Jameson was one of these survivors, a former soldier who had seen the best and worst of what humanity had to offer. Jameson had witnessed firsthand the devastation the Volteri brought to Earth. Yet he refused to let the invasion break him. As the world crumbled around him, Jameson found himself leading a ragtag group of rebels, all of them united by one goal: to push the Volteri back and take Earth back from the invaders. They weren't the strongest, nor the most well-equipped, but they had something the Volteri never anticipated: resilience. And that was enough to keep them alive. For now. The resistance moved in secret, operating from the ruins of once great cities. They were everywhere, hidden in the alleys of destroyed metropolises, in underground bunkers, in the wilderness, even in the abandoned factories where Earth's greatest weapons had once been built. There were no grand armies, no parades or celebrations. Instead, there was only the sound of hushed voices, of plans being made under the cover of darkness. Every day was a fight to stay alive, to keep pushing back against the overwhelming force of the Volteri. But as days turned into weeks, the resistance began to grow stronger. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were learning, adapting, and fighting back with increasing skill. Jameson's small group, at first hesitant and unsure, had begun to understand the enemy they were facing. They studied the Volteri, observed their tactics, and began to find weaknesses. The Dominion soldiers, for all their might, relied too heavily on their superior technology, often leaving them vulnerable to guerrilla tactics. The humans, with their ingenuity and fierce determination, began to exploit these weaknesses. Small attacks, subtle sabotage, and hit-and-run tactics kept the Volteri off balance, forcing them to constantly react to the humans' unpredictability. Word of these attacks spread, And slowly but surely, more survivors joined the fight. Some came from the remains of military units, still armed and dangerous. Others were civilians who had witnessed the horror of the invasion and could no longer stand idly by. Earth's people, once fragmented and divided, began to unite against their common enemy. They shared what little they had, using salvaged weapons and technology to strike at the Volturi whenever they could. No one had expected this from Earth. The invaders had thought humanity weak and easily broken, but the resistance had proven them wrong. But as the humans pushed back, the Volturi grew more determined. They were not accustomed to being challenged. Their leaders had expected Earth to fall within days, but now, weeks into the invasion, the resistance was gaining ground. The Volturi had underestimated the strength of the human spirit. They did not understand that Earth's people, even in the darkest moments, could find a reason to fight, and the Volturi were beginning to regret that mistake. One night, in the heart of the rebel base, Jameson gathered his group for a meeting. The mood was tense, but there was a sense of hope in the air that hadn't existed before. "We've done more than just survive," he said, his voice steady. "We've shown the Dominion that we can strike back. But we need more. If we're going to win this, we need to take the fight to them. We need to hit them where it hurts." The group listened in silence, each person feeling the weight of his words. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. The resistance had awakened, and now it was time to take the next step. They had a plan, a dangerous one, but one that could shift the balance of power in their favor. The Volturi had established a central command base on Earth, a massive fortress deep within the heart of a ruined city. If they could infiltrate this base, capture their leadership, and disrupt their command structure, it could buy Earth the time they needed to rally more support and turn the tide of the war. It was a risky move, but it was the only chance they had. The team set out under the cover of darkness, each member of the resistance carrying out their roles with precision. They moved quickly, using the knowledge they had gathered from previous skirmishes. Earth's landscape had changed dramatically, but it was still their home. They knew the land better than the invaders ever could. With every step, their confidence grew. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something more. The closer they got to the Volturi stronghold, the more intense the danger became. The Volturi were everywhere, their soldiers patrolling the area, unaware that a small human force was making its way through the ruins. Jameson's group moved quietly, slipping through abandoned buildings and underground tunnels, avoiding the Volturi's watchful eyes. Each step brought them closer to their target, but also closer to discovery. There were close calls, moments when it seemed as though they might be caught, moments when the Volturi seemed to be right behind them. But they pressed on, determined to succeed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the heart of the Volturi base. They could see the massive command center in the distance, guarded by heavily armored Volturi soldiers. The resistance had no illusions. They knew this would be the hardest part. But they were ready. Jameson signaled to his team, and in a split second, the air was filled with the sound of gunfire. The battle had begun. The humans fought with everything they had, using every tactic they had learned to keep the Volturi off balance. It was chaos, but it was the kind of chaos the resistance thrived in. In the midst of the fighting, Jameson and his team made their way into the command center. They found the Volturi leadership, surprised, unprepared, and disorganized. With quick thinking and precise action, the humans took control, capturing the invaders' high-ranking officers and causing a massive disruption in their command structure. For the first time since the invasion began, the Volturi were not in control. The resistance had struck a blow that would be felt across the galaxy. As they made their escape, the humans couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. They had done it. They had proven that they could fight back, that they could stand up to the might of the Volturi. And though the battle was far from over, the Resistance's success at striking the Volturi command center had sent shockwaves through both the invaders and the humans. For the first time since the invasion began, Earth had struck a decisive blow against the overwhelming might of the Volteri Dominion. The leadership of the invaders had been thrown into disarray, their once unbreakable control over Earth weakened. The fight was far from over, but hope had been reignited. But as the resistance prepared to take the fight to the invaders, they knew that the Volteri would not give up easily. They would retaliate with all the force they could muster. The next battle would not be like any they had fought before. It would be their chance to push the invaders back for good, or risk losing everything they had gained. The humans were ready, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead hung over them like a storm cloud. As the resistance moved forward with their plans, they encountered the Volteri's counterattacks, which grew more fierce and coordinated. The Dominion was not going to let their hold on Earth slip away so easily. The battles were brutal, the casualties mounting on both sides. But each time the Volteri thought they had cornered the resistance, the humans found a way to slip through their grasp, to strike back when it seemed all hope was lost. The tide had turned, but the war was far from over. The final battle was still to come, and it would determine the fate of Earth and of the human race. The Volteri had always believed they were invincible. For centuries, they had conquered countless worlds with ease, their superior technology and relentless strategies leaving no room for resistance. Earth, in their eyes, was just another fragile planet to crush underfoot. They had underestimated the humans, something that would soon prove to be their greatest mistake. As the battle for Earth continued, the Volteri began to realize the truth. The humans were not the weak, helpless beings they had assumed. They were a force to be reckoned with. Captain Marcus Jameson stood at the helm of the newly captured Volteri warship, the pulse of its engines vibrating through the metal beneath his feet. The battle had taken a strange turn, and he could feel it in the air. The Volteri had expected their technology to be enough to keep them in control of Earth, but now, with the warship in their hands and their newfound knowledge, the humans were beginning to strike back with tactics that the invaders could not predict. Jameson had always known that humans were resourceful, but what he hadn't anticipated was the incredible speed at which they adapted to the Volteri's ways. The warship, though advanced and heavily damaged during its capture, had become a symbol of the Resistance's resilience. They had managed to reverse engineer enough of its technology to understand its weaknesses, and from that moment on, the Volteri had no idea what was coming. The Resistance began launching surprise attacks that threw the Volteri off balance, their superior technology no longer giving them the upper hand. The Volteri had expected to break the humans with sheer force, but what they hadn't anticipated was the stubbornness of humanity's will to survive. The human resistance had grown stronger each day, learning from every loss and turning each setback into a lesson. The humans were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for their very identity. And in the process, they were learning to fight smarter, not harder. In the heart of the Volteri fleet, Admiral Karenna sat in her command room, glaring at the holographic displays of Earth's continents. Her forces had sustained losses, but nothing too significant, at least not enough to cause concern. She had expected the humans to crumble under pressure, to break when their cities were leveled and their armies scattered. But now she was beginning to realize how wrong she had been. The humans were not fighting a desperate war. They were building one, each day stronger and more unified. Karenna's hands clenched around the armrests of her chair. She had never underestimated an enemy before, but now she was forced to confront the unthinkable. The Volteri were losing. For the first time, they were no longer the hunters. They were the prey, and Earth was not the weak target they had thought it to be. The humans had turned their own broken world into a weapon, and the Volteri were starting to feel the sting of their mistakes. The turning point had come when a small, elite unit of human soldiers infiltrated a key Volteri command center on one of their supply ships. The humans had been expecting heavy resistance, but what they found instead was an intelligence network ripe for exploitation. The Volteri, confident in their dominance, had let their guard down, and the humans had seized the opportunity. Within hours, the resistance had disabled a large portion of the Valteri's communication systems, leaving their fleet vulnerable and confused. Corena's reports now came in piecemeal. Ships that were supposed to be in place to block any human counteroffensives were simply missing. The Valteri's supply lines were being hit by, begun questioning the orders of their leaders, and morale was plummeting. The very thing that had made the Valteri so dangerous, their rigid hierarchy, was now their greatest weakness. Jameson's mind raced as he reviewed the final preparations. The Valteri were preparing to launch a massive attack, and it was up to the humans to stop them. He knew the odds were stacked against them. The Valteri had far more ships than the Resistance, and their firepower was unmatched. But the humans had something the Valteri did not: unity. The Resistance was made up of fighters from all over Earth, from every country, every city. They had learned to work together, to fight as one. And that was their greatest weapon. As the Resistance forces gathered in their final stronghold, they received word of the Valteri fleet's arrival. The invaders were closing in fast, and the time to act was now. Jameson addressed his team, his voice calm but firm. "This is it. We've come a long way, but we finish this here. We fight for our homes, for our families, and for everyone who believed in us when no one else did. Let's show them what Earth can do." The battle began with a sudden flash of light as the Valteri ships descended upon Earth. Their weapons began to fire, sending shockwaves through the atmosphere. The sky above the Resistance's stronghold turned dark, the air thick with the hum of approaching destruction. But the humans were not afraid. They had trained for this moment, prepared for every possible outcome. As the first wave of Valteri ships moved into position, the Resistance launched their counterattack. Fighter jets, repurposed from Earth's old military stockpiles, shot up into the sky, their weapons blazing. The humans were not just defending their planet, they were attacking with everything they had. The battle raged across Earth's skies, and below, the streets filled with civilians who had once lived in fear, but now fought alongside the soldiers. Earth's forces had learned from their past mistakes, and they had turned every city, every bunker, into a fortress. The Valteri, taken by surprise at the sheer determination of the humans, found themselves unable to gain ground. For every ship they destroyed, two more appeared. For every missile launched, there was an equal retaliation. The Valteri began to realize that Earth was not the easy conquest they had once thought. The humans were not just fighting back, they were winning. But the Valteri had one final trick up their sleeve. The invasion fleet's flagship, a massive warship capable of devastating entire cities with a single strike, entered the battlefield. Its weapons locked onto Earth's capital cities, and it fired without hesitation, sending waves of destruction crashing down. The Resistance fighters on the ground could do little to stop it. The Valteri had thought this would be the blow that crushed the humans, the moment when their will would finally break. But they had not counted on the resolve of Earth's people. Jameson watched from his command center, his heart pounding in his chest. The Valteri flagship loomed overhead, casting a shadow over everything below. The Resistance had taken down many of the smaller ships, but the flagship remained. They had to find a way to stop it before it was too late. He turned to his team, his eyes sharp. "We've trained for this. We can't back down now. We have one shot at this." The plan was simple but dangerous. Using the intelligence they had gathered from their previous strikes, the Resistance had discovered a weak point in the flagship's shields, an area where the energy fields were thinner than the rest. It was a long shot, but it was their only chance. They would have to use their most advanced weaponry, coupled with precise timing, to hit the flagship's vulnerable point. Jameson and his team launched their final assault. Fighter jets streaked across the sky, weaving through the chaos as they lined up their shot. It was a moment of pure tension, one single opportunity to take down the massive ship. And then, in a flash of light, they fired. The missile rocketed toward the flagship, cutting through the sky with incredible speed. Time seemed to slow as the missile impacted the flagship's weak spot. The explosion was massive, sending shockwaves through the atmosphere. For a moment, there was silence. And then, the flagship exploded in a brilliant burst of light, its pieces scattering across the sky. The humans had done it. The Valtteri flagship had been destroyed, and the tide of the battle had turned for good. The remaining Valtteri ships, now leaderless and demoralized, began to retreat. The resistance had struck a blow that the invaders could not recover from. It was over. Earth had triumphed. In the aftermath of the battle, the humans looked to the stars, no longer as helpless victims, but as victors. The galaxy would never see Earth in the same way again. The Valtteri, once the unquestioned rulers of the universe, had been defeated by guerrilla attacks with a precision that was almost beyond belief. The humans had adapted, learning how to exploit the smallest weaknesses in the Valtteri's technology. What was once an unstoppable war machine now felt more like a wounded beast, staggering as it tried to maintain control. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Jameson and his team were preparing for the next phase of their operation. They had learned to use the Valtteri's own tactics against them, using their technology to counteract the very weapons that had once been used to oppress them. Human ingenuity, which had always been humanity's greatest strength, was now being combined with the knowledge of their enemy's weaknesses. Every attack was a strike aimed directly at the Valtteri's Achilles heel, and with every victory, the humans became bolder. As the resistance continued to push back, the Valtteri found themselves in a defensive posture. They had underestimated Earth's potential for organized resistance, and now they were paying the price. The humans' unpredictability was their greatest weapon, and the Valtteri could not adapt fast enough to counter it. They had underestimated the human spirit, which could not be broken by mere force. The humans had shown that they were capable of turning the tide of war, not by fighting in the way the Valtteri expected, but by fighting on their own terms. Corinna paced in her command room, her mind racing. She had always prided herself on her ability to anticipate the enemy's moves, but this time, the humans had outsmarted her. The surprise attacks, the sabotage, the endless persistence, it was all taking a toll on her fleet. The Valtteri had relied too heavily on their technological superiority, and now it was beginning to unravel. She watched helplessly as the latest intelligence report came in. The humans had launched another attack, this time on a key research facility deep within the Valtteri-controlled sector. The facility, designed to develop even more advanced weapons, was now in ruins. And the humans weren't stopping. They had breached the walls of the Valtteri's most secure military outposts and had begun to target their fleet's supply lines. The Valtteri were starting to feel the strain, and it was all thanks to their initial miscalculation. Jameson, meanwhile, was preparing for his next mission. The momentum was shifting, and he knew that the humans could not afford to slow down. The Valtteri might have underestimated humanity's capacity for resistance, but the resistance was not about to let up now. Every victory had to count. Every attack had to bring them closer to pushing the invaders off Earth for good. The Valtteri had learned the hard way that the human spirit could not be crushed by overwhelming force. And now, with the tides of war beginning to shift, they realized that their conquest of Earth was far from the easy victory they had once believed it to be. The humans were not just fighting for their survival. They were fighting to reclaim their home and to show the universe that no one, not even the mightiest empire, could underestimate them. The final battle had come. After months of fighting, Earth had transformed from a planet on the brink of annihilation to a symbol of defiance, a beacon of hope in a galaxy that had once seen humanity as nothing more than a speck. The Valtteri, despite their advanced technology and overwhelming numbers, had underestimated the strength of the human spirit. Now, as the Valtteri fleet prepared for one last assault on Earth, they had no idea that the humans were not only prepared for the worst, they were prepared to end the war. Captain Marcus Jameson stood at the head of the resistance forces, his gaze fixed on the stars above. The final plan had been set into motion, and Earth's fate hung in the balance. It was strange to think that a mere year ago, no one had believed humanity stood a chance. Now, Earth was not just a place to fight for. It was the rallying point for all who wished to defy the Volturi. Jameson could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but there was no turning back. His people had fought too hard to lose now. The Volturi, once so confident in their superiority, were on the edge of collapse. Their command ships, once thought to be impenetrable, had been crippled by the humans' relentless strikes. The humans had learned to fight in ways the Volturi never expected, using tactics that were unorthodox but devastating. The resistance had taken the Volturi's own technology and turned it against them, a strategy that not only weakened the enemy's military might, but also sowed discord within their ranks. The once unified Volturi were beginning to fracture. Officers had